On the face of it, Ethembalethu appears to be one of many successful South African transformation stories. Displaced people reclaiming what is rightfully theirs, supported by the systems of a new dispensation. But the story of Ethembalethu is not that simple, and in its complexity lie far-reaching lessons for a now not-so-new government, still grappling to undo embedded principles of discrimination that manifest themselves in policies and attitudes in a post-democratic South Africa. The Ethembalethu story reads like a fairy tale. A decade ago, members of this community, composed largely of laid-off farm workers, wanted to buy their own farm in a peri-urban area west of Johannesburg. The name of the village would be Ethembalethu, meaning our hope.
Hi, my name is Ntombini Marangani. Today is 11th of October 2008 and we're celebrating the sod turning of the Ethembalethu eco-village.
The Ethembalethu project will benefit the community because now the community are going to have a permanent security of tenure, a better services and a proper accommodation and better school for their children.
To fully understand the trials and tribulations of Ethembalethu, we must take a closer look at the geography of apartheid. Apartheid systems were underpinned by racially based separate development. Africans, Indians, and people of mixed race, so-called coloureds, were consigned to designated locations separate from and invariably inferior to white residential areas. This duality of living spaces was underpinned by an elaborate network of laws, zoning regulations, tax incentives, plot subdivision restrictions, and targeted government programs, systematically making it impossible for people to mix outside the confines of strictly defined relationships. With the advent of democracy, it was left to a new administration to undo the intricate workings of apartheid policy and effect a much-touted better life for all. But as the Ethembalethu case indicates, this was easier said than done.
The apartheid planning system has unfortunately persisted in South Africa over 10 years after the end of apartheid, and this is because of a number of reasons. Number one, there have been regulations and laws that have persisted in the statute books that were established, that were created during the apartheid era.
For instance, in South Africa, there is a restriction on the subdivision of land. You actually have to have the approval of the minister if you want to subdivide your farm. That's quite unique in the world. I come from Holland, we have no such thing. I've lived in the US, there is no such thing. In France, there is no such thing. It's typical for settler societies like South Africa used to be.
This case demonstrates that when you do try to break out of the apartheid planning mold, it's very difficult. But it's really about the practical difficulty of engaging with a land market that has been structured by years of apartheid and segregation.
And so the first problem that poor people face accessing land is that there actually aren't any small plots for sale. Because by design, the land market prevents those small plots from happening.
People who have a stake in that land market are very resistant to any changes to that market. That resistance has been largely race-based until now, but it's increasingly becoming a class or wealth-driven resistance now.
In the mid-1990s, Mr. Molefi Selibo, a community leader and long-time resident in the Muldersdrift area, was motivated by the widespread tenure, insecurity and poor living conditions of farm workers and farm dwellers in his area, and began organizing families into a housing association.
I get involved in this project of Ethembalethu in 1996. The reason was that there was a lack of proper accommodation and lack of proper services for our community in that area.
Beginning with about 250 families, the association started a savings scheme aimed at acquiring land in the area upon which they would build their own home homes and carry out small-scale farming. Their vision was clear: a village with houses, some individual farming fields, a grazing area, and some common areas for recreation.
The way I see the development is going to be one of the most successful projects in our country, because it is one of the well-managed project which is community-driven, and whereby the community are taking responsibility to make it a success. So we believe it's going to be one of the most beneficial project in our country, which many people can even take a lesson from it.
By the end of 1997, the association was incorporated as a Section 21 or not-for-profit company called the Muldersdrift Home Trust Foundation.
We decided to form a Muldersdrift Home Trust Foundation in April, the 14th of April in 1996, when we came together as a community in that area as a result of lack of proper accommodation, lack of security of tenure, and lack of services for our community. So we decided to come together as a community to make our own contribution and work together with government to be able to have a proper accommodation and proper facilities for our families.
These families saved and contributed 50 rands a year and later 100 rands a month, intent on buying sufficient land in the area to build their homes. In that year, the association made its first offer to purchase land, which was successful.
Because here, in fact, was a group of farm workers who had not gone to government. They had saved their own money. And they did this for more than a year. They saved 125,000 rands. And they thought, surely, with that amount of money, we could actually, in the new South Africa, go on the market and buy a farm. And then we'll settle ourselves and we'll establish a village. Surely that must be possible now. And that's when the story started.
Yes, the trustees of the foundation, we tried to acquire land almost 12 years ago.
In March 1997, the Muldersdrift Home Trust Foundation, or MHTF, entered into a purchase agreement with the owner of portion 120 Rietfontein, a small holding of 8.5 hectares in Muldersdrift. However, during the course of negotiations with the seller on the method of payment, the sale was suddenly cancelled.
After we have made an agreement with the seller, it happens that the neighboring landowners started knowing about our plans, and they approached the seller to refuse selling us the land. So we lost that piece of land.
It emerged that a group of neighbouring landowners had made a successful counter-offer to purchase the land, which began MHTF's long battle with the not-in-my-backyard syndrome, which pervades the spatial distribution of human settlements throughout South Africa.
Well, there's a couple of things. The one is to acknowledge that as one tries to break down those patterns, there is going to be resistance, and in this case demonstrates that very clearly. It's much easier for officials to settle 300 or 400 poor black households on the outskirts of an existing black township. There's unlikely to be the same level of resistance, and so it becomes a much easier piece of work for the officials. It obviously does nothing to address the apartheid planning patterns.
The report contains a number of allegations of racism by landowners in the area, allegations of the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard, that landowners don't want blacks living in this community. But what the report has failed to acknowledge is the proposal which was made by this association to put an intensive farming operation on that piece of ground. The intention was that landowners would provide part of the funding for it, that we would obtain some funding from the IDC, that we would provide them with management expertise initially, that we would provide them with training, and that this proposal we gave a full business plan on it, and it would have been economically sustainable. It would have provided employment for approximately 80 individuals, and the proposal included the building of houses for those 80 families. The intention was that as the loan to the IDC was repaid, so the equity would have been transferred into the hands of those beneficiaries.
The next year, the MHTF made another offer on a similarly sized piece of land, portion 77 Rietfontein, adjacent to the first plot. This offer was also initially accepted, and the MHTF entered into a purchase agreement. However, the MHTF was unable to pay the full purchase price immediately and sought help from a commercial bank for a loan to cover up the balance. Despite the organization's proven saving record, they could not get a top-up loan from the bank.
But we finally make an agreement with the seller to pay on an installment basis for a period of 15 years. Firstly by paying a deposit and making a monthly payment.
At this time, the Mildersdrift Home Trust Foundation decided to secure the services of a range of professionals to support the increasingly technical process of acquiring land for their dual-purpose use.
I got involved in the Ethembalethu project when an official in the municipality who was responsible for rural development called me and asked for help. She had been in the Department of Land Affairs in Gauteng, and I'm advising the Department of Land Affairs here, and so I had met her. And she said, listen, I have a big problem in my area. I have several projects in which communities want to establish land reform projects or housing projects, but it's really difficult for me to find out how to actually do this.
It wasn't simply a case study that that came in and looked at it from the outside, but we were very much a part of the process, supporting the community and supporting the municipality, supporting all the players, the Department of Land Affairs, the Provincial Department of Housing, facilitating meetings between the three of them, helping to draft correspondence, generally facilitating the process, meeting with all the consultants.
With the help of experts, they submitted an application for housing subsidies to the Gauteng Provincial Department of Housing's People's Housing Process. This application was approved in 1998 for 263 households. Late in 1998, with 82% of the purchase price paid, the MHTF received a letter from the landowner
saying that there was a misrepresentation when we came into agreement to buy the land from him. But we rejected that because we know that that was not the true.
When the seller cancelled the sale under pressure from his neighbours, that went to court because the community went to court to uphold their contract, that they're saying there was no grounds for the seller to cancel the purchase agreement.
To make matters worse, trespassing charges were laid against the members of the MHTF, and on March 5th, 1999, 47 members were arrested.
We were very, very surprised. How can people be arrested on the land that they have an agreement, which was valid even that time? But because they have colluded with the police didn't even care, even when we show them the agreement that we have, that this agreement, for now, it is still valid. So there's nothing that stops us to be on the property.
Eventually, the South African Police Service acknowledged that these arrests had been wrongful and released the MHTF members. In November 2000, the matter of the contract came before the High Court. it became clear that the landowner had no legal basis upon which to cancel the sale, and he, together with the representative of the white neighbours who had preempted the first purchase attempt by the MHTF, proposed an out-of-court settlement.
So they proposed that they are going to give us an extra money, provided that we agree not to continue with that land. We should identify another land.
In the out-of-court settlement that was then reached, the neighbours persuaded the community to agree to a cancellation of that sale in return for a large cash payment and an agreement, a signed agreement that they wouldn't live within an area that was hatched on a map basically surrounding that first piece of land.
Bruised but not beaten, the MHTF again looked for alternative land. In 2001, the MHTF made an offer on a much bigger piece of land further away from the racially hostile environment where their previous purchase agreements had been frustrated.
They then found the current site, but the money was insufficient to cover the full purchase price.
So we were happy about this land, and then we again entered into a sale agreement with the landowner, but the land was about 650,000, the price for the land, and now we didn't have again the money to be able to pay the land outright, because we still have to pay for consultants to do proper investigation on the suitability of the land. So we didn't have enough to pay the land outright. So we started negotiating with the Department of Housing, because by that time they have already allocated subsidies for our community, and they negotiate with the land affairs to assist in terms of purchasing of that land.
In 2001, the MHTF entered into its third purchase agreement for portions 78, Driefontein, roughly 31 hectares, for a price of 650,000 rands. At the same time, the Gauteng Department of Housing agreed in principle to transfer the MHTF's 1998 successful application for People's Housing Process Capital Subsidies to this land.
It's a well-located site, close to Bearsnordeer, close to the main access route to the Cradle of Humankind, which would hopefully become an important tourist route. It's well located for future development and future opportunities, and that's what I think makes it an important site for that community.
By now, the MHTF had further refined their vision of how they wanted to live. They decided to build an eco-village to be called Ethembalethu.
There are different definitions that are given to eco-villages, but they were looking at a settlement will be self-sufficient in a certain way.
The idea was that it was not going to be a wall-to-wall RDP housing sprawl of houses, but that it would, first of all, allow for the ecological processes that depend on the river system that runs through the site.
Because they were looking at having a plant for the storage system within the settlement. They were looking at also an alternative means of power.
And then to design the place, design the layout of the residential sites in a way that is sensitive to the environment, in a way that is energy efficient, that would promote water, efficient use of water.
And also even for their toilets, they were looking not at waterborne system but other alternative ways.
However, the land they now made an offer for was 3 times the size of the previous 2 farms, and the purchase price of 650,000 rands was beyond their means. They appealed to the Gauteng Department of Housing for advice, and the matter was referred to the Gauteng Provincial Office of the National Department of Land Affairs. During the course of negotiations between the Department of Land Affairs, Gauteng Department of Housing and the Mogale City, The white neighbours of this new site got wind of the proposed project, and as had the neighbours surrounding the previous farms, began to raise objections, this time using the issues of environmental impact as the basis of their objection.
A chicken farm is agricultural and it is farming. It is therefore this is an area which is specifically designed for farming, so that is perfectly within the acceptable type of development which should be taking place in this area. One can argue whether one likes chicken farming or one doesn't like chicken farming, but the reality is that it's agricultural. As far as the sandworks is concerned, we as an association have objected to that sandworks. We are attempting to have it closed down. We're attempting to have it rehabilitated. We've done a significant amount of work in trying to move that forward, and we've spent a lot of money on legal costs in trying to do that. But we have to accept the reality that it has been around for a long time. The question, though, I think, is why allow a quarry and not a development? I think that the issue is the number of people. It's in effect, it's humans that destroy an environment. And putting 300 odd houses on there, plus in terms of the application and in terms of the World Bank report, two households per stand, so that means in effect over 600 houses on that property. Don't forget that there's then street lighting, there's taxi ranks, there is sewerage which is needed, there's all the extra stormwater runoff which comes as part of that. It's an ecologically sensitive area, but the biggest problem lies in the fact that how do you then prevent the guy next door from doing exactly the same thing? So on its own, yes, one could argue the environment could sustain one development of that nature. We believe it would have a significant impact on destroying it because of the light pollution and all that kind of a thing that will take place. But what happens multiplied by 10 or 20 or 50? And that really is the issue which we do not believe can be overcome.
There were a number of reasons that they cited, but when you look at it, the main reason why the opposition didn't want the settlement was just to say, not in my backyard. I won't have a black settlement within my backyard, which is going to go down to be a slum area.
Officials of the Department of Land Affairs and the Gauteng Department of Housing, alarmed by these objections, notified Mogale City that they would not be contributing towards the purchase of the land after all. After protracted correspondence between the three spheres of government, the Department of Land Affairs finally agreed to purchase the land. The full price of 650,000 rands was paid by the DLA to Mogale City, which then acquired the land in the name of the municipality in March 2002.
This piece of land, what they did was to approach the Department of Land Affairs to access the land. At that time, they were already an established legal entity. And what the Department of Land Affairs did was to purchase the land for the benefit of the trust. But instead of registering that land in the name of the trust, the land was registered in the name of the municipality, with the proviso that the municipality would develop that land for the benefit of the members of the trust.
Once the land purchase was final, the Milders Drift Home Trust Foundation had to obtain two separate legal permissions through two separate legal processes to develop the land. First, a scoping environment impact assessment needed to be carried out in terms of the Environment Conservation Act of 1989. Second, a development facilitation application needed to be written to the Gauteng Development Tribunal to obtain planning permission.
When we were discussing the establishment of the settlement with the community members, what they were looking at was not your typical township. They were looking at a settlement that will have residential and business opportunities within. For instance, they were looking at areas where they can do agriculture, or in terms of the common age policies of the Department of Land Affairs, where there will be communal areas where they will have they will conduct those agricultural projects. And they were also looking at having business sites within the settlement where people will be able to do businesses.
In May 2003, the Development Facilitation Application for planning approval of the proposed project was submitted to the Gauteng Development Tribunal. At the tribunal hearing in 2003, the application had to be withdrawn due to various procedural and technical flaws. This happened against growing discontent from the neighbours in the area.
The farmers, they were selling their land because they wanted to establish townhouses or cluster houses. And as a municipality, we felt that these settlements should have an element of low-cost housing within them so as to cater for low-income people. But what we discovered was that the developers were not eager to do that. And as a municipality, we felt that that was the way to follow in order to make sure that the spatial planning caters for everybody within the jurisdiction of the municipality.
In the second half of 2005, the preparation of the environmental impact assessment and the development facilitation application restarted in earnest. Eventually, though, it was only in 2008, 3 years later, after several tribunal hearings, that the MHDF was able to secure the land that they had been seeking for over 10 years.
In terms of the EIA application, we submitted to the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Environment. We submitted for 300 units, but when they gave their record of decision, they only approved for 150. And then we feel as a community that justice was not done on this issue. Although we fully support or happy about other contents in the decision, but we feel reducing the number would create a problem for us. And again, the department has failed to give a proper reasons why they are reducing that number.
The Ethembalethu story draws attention to the many challenges that poor people face accessing land and housing in South Africa. Key amongst these challenges is the inability of people to implement land reform and housing projects in these peri-urban areas because of a policy and program gap.
This case demonstrates that when you do try to break out of the apartheid planning mold, it's very difficult.
And yes, we believe that the department is still looking at the old models of apartheid, where they believe that only few people should reside in that area, because now that area, the landowners believe that it only belongs to few of them. So now they don't want a lot of black community in that area. Now,
we've taken a stand, we believe in it, we're prepared to work for it, we've put a lot of money into it, we've put a lot of effort into it, and it's because of something that we believe in. And whether it happens to be whites or blacks is to us irrelevant. It's a densification of the area which the area ecologically cannot sustain.
Now it seems the department has not looked at this issue properly, because now it seems they are trying to satisfy the landowners at the expense of the poor community who need proper housing for their families.
In fact, the project shows that the government keeps on putting enormous hurdles in their way to establish what is basically a very simple project, a village, a way of organizing space and organizing economic activities that is probably one of the most common forms of human settlement in the world. And what you could actually learn from the case is that a village is actually not allowed by law here. You know, that might sound strange, but it is actually true. You can live in an urban township, or you can live on a commercial farm, but you can't live in a village. That is not allowed.
A number of lessons and recommendations emerged from this case study. Critically, improving access to land for low-income households in the peri-urban areas to allow for the type of integrated housing and agricultural settlement aspired to by the MHTF needs to be explicitly facilitated.
What is also happening in terms of land, you find that there is the subdivision of land, Act of 1970, which doesn't allow for the subdivision of agricultural land. Then that means that if poor people would want to come into agriculture, they will have to get these big pieces of land. And in that area, what has happened is that the prices of land have gone up. So it becomes difficult for people to access these big pieces of land.
Experts who have reflected on the Ethembalethu case suggest that this facilitation should include revisiting the urban edge policy, overcoming reluctance from municipalities to the settlement of low-income families, making the integrated development plans explicitly pro-poor for both demand-led and supply-driven land acquisition and housing development, simplifying and aligning legal procedures, clarifying intergovernmental roles and responsibilities, unifying relevant subsidies and decentralizing them to the local level, introducing key reforms to enable more effective participation in the land market by low-income South Africans, identifying and implementing appropriate infrastructure service standards, building and or freeing up capacity to support demand-driven housing and land reforms, proposals and proponents.
The planning paradigms that we've got and the planning regulations that we have for urban development, for residential development, are predicated on an assumption that the people living in those areas are going to be the sort of people you traditionally find in a moderately affluent suburban area. The needs of poor people are quite different. They need to use their houses for more purposes simply than residential purposes. In particular, and particularly in peri-urban areas where the opportunity arises, they need to be able to supplement their household food requirements with some basic agricultural production, some livestock, some crop. Poor people are obviously also the most vulnerable to rising fuel prices, rising transportation costs. And so for a project to be pro-poor in its outcome, a project that involves poor people, it needs to be one that locates poor people in a place that enables them to access the opportunities that will enable them to become less poor. And so obviously apartheid planning, but also the sort of planning we've seen since 1994 has been generally anti-poor in that it has tended to concentrate the poor people in areas where their opportunities for becoming less poor are very small, and they effectively become trapped in places of poverty and deepening poverty.
For now, the members of the Mildersdrift Home Trust Foundation celebrate their hard-fought victory. Their 10-year struggle is a clear indication that the freedoms of democracy don't yet naturally translate into tangible rights in the matters of land and housing. Indeed, if this case is anything to go by, it is clear that many more battles like Ethembalethu would need to be fought before the war for land and housing is won in South Africa. We live in hope.